All right, ladies and gentlemen, DDP versus Sean Strickland. I'm a little late on this one. It's been broken down from every angle. But you know what it's made me realize? No one knows the rules. All right, let's break it down. Welcome to the GSMC MMA podcast. I'm your new host, Jake Shahead. Let's dive in. Okay, obviously an incredible fight, and I want to start with the fact, not a robbery. Not a robbery. In my opinion, it should have been a draw. Judges had it round 3, two of the judges for Dricus, and that's where he won. Honestly, it could have been 3-2 either way, 48-47, either way. My opinion, should have been 47-47, and if that were to happen, the champ retains the belt, and you do an immediate rematch, which is what should be happening, which is what the fans want to see for the record. Dricus, after the fight in the post-fight presser, he said that him and Izzy, he was asked about whether it's personal with Izzy, and he was saying no, that it's just the fight he feels people want to see. And he's wrong about that. It's not the fight people want to see. I was on Chael Sonnen's YouTube channel, and he did a little poll about next fight, and overwhelmingly people wanted to see DDP and Sean Strickland part 2 immediately, and so do I, because that was such a close fight. So close it's impossible to call. Should have been 47-47. Sean retains the belt. We get part 2 immediately. And to be honest, right after the fight, Sean he should have called for it. Obviously DDP gets interviewed first. He calls Izzy out almost reluctantly. Almost a reluctant call out there. But meaning Strickland, should have come back immediately and said, no, let's run it back. That was the wrong call. The judges made the wrong call. And now for the past, 3-4 days now, he's been whining on Twitter, on social medias. Not the move. Also, on a side note, you gotta live with it. You rewatch the fight, and as a fighter, it's understandable. You think you won, and I would too in that position. He outstruck him 170-120 in significant strikes. He outstruck him. And you know what? He was getting that jab in. Clear, decisive round 1. But what it's made me realize also is that there's no clarity. Even the people at the top of the sport, there's no clarity on how to call a fight, on how to, ref a fight, judge a fight. Is it damage? Are we prioritizing damage? There was a moment in the fight where John Anik and Dominic Cruz were talking, and Cruz was saying that despite the fact that Sean is on his back foot, he's doing most of the damage. And John corrected him that that's not how we judge MMA. Right? We judge it, I guess, by pressure, by control, and by those factors, Dricus overwhelmingly has the win. But if we're looking at damage, it's close, and Sean outlands him by 1.5 times. With that being said, it's tough to know what the price of a jab is compared to the price of a flashy right hook or a snappy kick. What Dricus has is his significant strikes that he landed were more significant than the ones Sean landed. By that I mean they were flashier. They were snappier. Sean had that jab, that left jab, and it's so quick. And after the fight, Dricus was saying it feels like a boulder hitting you, which is telling, man. It's a strong punch. It's a strong punch, even if it doesn't look flashy. It's an effective punch, and we saw how DDP's face looked afterwards. He was beat up, man. That black eye that he couldn't open, swollen shut. He'll need time to recover. Sean obviously also cut up, but according to him anyway, that was from the headbutt. And sort of, if you go... during the fight, the commentators said it was an elbow. If you rewatch the fight, it seems like he's right. There's a moment in the 3rd round, I believe, where Sean is when they're in the clinch, Sean is up against the fence. DDP's below him, and he comes up, and the back of his head, inadvertent, by the way, this is not an intentional headbutt, but nevertheless hits that left eye and splits it open. And the commentators were saying that it was because of an elbow. But it seems, that Sean's right, and he later tweeted this week that headbutt made it hard for him to see, but he didn't want to take the coward's way out and make it a no contest. Which is stupid, by the way. Not that he... Look, if you know it's a headbutt, which I don't know that he knew, but if you know, you tell the ref. In terms of, the odds of it being a no contest from that split eye, he would have been able to make that decision in the 5 minutes he has of rest. The doctor would have... They didn't stop the fight between rounds. It wasn't that bad of a cut to where you stop the fight for that. But what it could have done is it could have alerted the judges to the fact that that is not an elbow, and maybe that little bit of difference where the cut, they know that the cut, instead of being a legal strike, it's an illegal strike, and maybe that sways the round. By the way, that's a round Sean lost on the judges' scorecards. I believe that's round 3. So you got to call that out if you're Sean, and you knew. That could have swayed the fight had he said something. But he didn't. And so we have that close split decision loss. One other thing I wanted to talk about in reference to all of this, and kind of in reference to the rules as well, is what is the price of a takedown, right? A takedown alone, if you don't do anything with it. We saw DDP take Sean up until the 5th round, down at will. He started stuffing them in the 5th round, and he did a better job of predicting where they were coming in, and that's why I thought he kind of and it seems everybody thought that he decisively won the 5th round. The 1st and the 5th round belonged to Sean, without question. In that 5th round, stuffing the takedowns. But outside of round 5, it seemed DDP was mostly getting takedowns whenever he wanted to. But, and it's a big but, he was doing nothing with them. They were takedowns for the sake of takedowns. And so my question on the rules, and it seems to be a hot topic of debate, what's the value of pressure? What's the value of a takedown without control and without ultimately damage? Because the goal of a fighting sport should be to damage your opponent. Let's put the UFC aside for a second. If you're in a street fight, which the UFC, which MMA is supposed to be a simulation of, kind of as close as we can get to a true fight without, killing each other. If you're in the street and somebody takes you down scary, if you can get up without any damage done, why do you care? Well, you're getting back up, okay, it's annoying. It gives you something to think about for the first time, second, third time, and then, okay, what's the price of your takedown if you can't do anything with it? If we get back up and we get right back to the same fight, it's if you have 10 seconds of control time with not a single strike landed, you might as well have not taken the guy down. There's a claim and there's an argument that DDP was the only one wrestling, right? He was the only one using that, and that should give him some sort of bonus. I don't know. One counter example, and where it gets tricky, is let's think about the 2nd round. I don't know if you guys remember the Peter Yan, Aljamain Sterling fight 2, not the first one. By the way, Aljo knows the rules and abuses them. That's for another day, but his grounded hand to not get kneed in the head is such a big part of the reason why people dislike him. Neither here nor there. But let's go to that 2nd round in the 2nd fight where there was a debate. Sterling, Aljamain, won decisively. There was no debate about whether he won the round, but the debate was whether it's a 10-9 or a 10-8. Right? And what he did in the round is he eliminated any sort of offense from Yan. He was on his back. He held him. I don't think he did that much damage, though. It was just complete control for 5 minutes. And obviously at that point you win the round. You do have to, if a fighter is able to establish a dominant position for a long period of time, and it's a big and avoid any damage, Because if you're on the bottom, if you're in top position and the guy on the bottom is throwing up submission attempts, is throwing up, I mean, hell, there's guys that get knocked out by up kicks, right? That's happened. That's technically they were in a dominant position and they got knocked out. So given that you're in a dominant position and that you avoid damage from the other guy, you're obviously going to win the round. You did do more there. I'll also remind you guys of the Cyril Francis Ngannou fight, where Gane was winning the first 2 rounds. Francis supposedly 2 torn ACLs, and he had those like kind of knee braces on. 2 torn ACLs, was ineffective striking, and then he did something really unexpected that we haven't seen from Gane before or since then. And to be fair, I think he vacated the belt, and he damn near knocked out Tyson Fury since then in a boxing match, so he's obviously not going to be wrestling there. But yeah, he took Cyril down, dragged him to the mat, and held him there, and won the fight on the strength of that. So if you control a guy enough, you're obviously not going to give, if you're not taking damage and you're controlling a guy, you're not going to give the fight to the other guy. But that wasn't the case in the DDP Sean Strickland fight, and it's difficult to kind of propose that those 6 takedowns aren't a big reason why DDP won the fight, and the pressure he was applying. But again, if you're putting on the pressure, even if you're throwing combination, he threw a lot of leg kicks, especially early, and Sean, masterful, as he always is, at checking those. And it hurts both guys when you're checking him like that. And Dricus kept, I think they waned a bit, but he kept throwing them for a good amount of time, and tough fighter, no question there. But yeah, just a question. I don't have answers. To me, though, it seems like damage should be your criteria, not pressure, not control. They're factors, don't get me wrong, but ultimately, damage is the number one thing. Now, unfortunately, damage is difficult to quantify. It's difficult to judge, right? There's significant strikes, like I was saying earlier. What's the price of a jab versus an overhand right, snappy overhand right that looks sexy, that looks flashy? Which is what kind of the difference between the combinations. Do you look at the face? I mean, some guys bleed way easier. The Diaz brothers have scar tissue everywhere. You nick them, they're bleeding. I'll remind you of that first Conor McGregor, both Diaz, meaning both Nate versus McGregor fights, he was bloodied. But the first one that Nate won, those first 2 rounds he was getting pieced up, to be fair. But if you look at the end, it looks like McGregor mauled him, when in fact, Nate won the fight. So, how much do you take that into consideration? And it does sway the judges. It does sway the judges when one guy's bloodied. And that headbutt, if they know it's a headbutt, again, you see a bloodied guy, you think it's from a legal combo. It's different when you think it's from an illegal combo. So, hard to know. Hard to know. What can be said, though, about this fight is both guys answered a ton of questions. If we back up a year, nobody knew who DDP was 13 months ago, and nobody would have thought Sean would be in this position. Nobody knew Sean either 13 months ago. They've had such a rise, such an immediate rise. Nobody gave, and probably rightly so, DDP or Sean a chance in their last fights. Robert Whittaker, DDP. Rob is one of the greatest at 185 of all time. Regardless of what happens the rest of his career, regardless if he goes on a Tony Ferguson I hope not, because he's a fan favorite and a favorite of mine as well. But, if he loses his next 3 fights and is out of the UFC, still one of the greatest at 185 to ever do it. Seeing DDP beat up on him like that was insane. You saw maybe one of the best fighters of all time in that octagon. Or Robert Whittaker underestimated him. Likely, it's a guy you've never heard of. Everybody thinks you're going to beat him easily. Those are the trickiest fights, But it's clear, one thing is clear for both of these guys after the fight, is that they are legitimate champions, legitimate championship contenders for the next, for the next 5 years. They'll be around, at least. You know? Same with Sean. The stories, there's this kind of nice reciprocity in both stories. Sean, nobody gave him a chance in the Izzy fight. Nobody, and the first time people really heard his name was when he got knocked out by Alex. That's what people knew him for before he became champ, before he became probably the most popular person in the UFC. Crazy to say. Who would have thought that 6 months ago? Who would have thought that after he got knocked out by Alex? Nobody. Nobody was giving him a chance. He steps in. Nobody's giving him a chance. And again, the situation that Rob was in against DDP is very similar to the one that Izzy was in against Sean. You get a guy, the whole world thinks you're going to walk right through this guy. Maybe it's hard to motivate yourself. And now Izzy was in a similar position, or meaning Izzy was at the height of his career before then. He'd just beaten Alex, beaten his personal boogeyman for the first time. One of the greatest moments in UFC history, one of the greatest moments in sports in 2023. And he's riding high, or was that 2022? It might have been late 2022. And then he gets in there with Sean, and Sean just walked him down. That's one thing DDP did a great job of, is Izzy's a counter striker. DDP had Sean on his back foot the whole time. Big reason he won. He was constantly applying the pressure. He was throwing takedowns. He was wrestling. He was controlling the range. And granted, all of that. Nevertheless, who did more damage? Who had more significant strikes? You know? How do you stack those things up? It's very difficult. It's very nuanced. It should have been a draw. We should be running it back right now. Rematch. It's what the fans want to see. You know? But, yeah. They both answered so many questions on whether they're legitimate fighters. DDP on his cardio. I mean, everybody was doubting the man's cardio going into this fight. The narrative before it was 2 rounds, DDP. If he doesn't knock Sean out, first 2, maybe 3 rounds, it's over. It's Sean's fight. Sean has the cardio, and to be fair, he is a cardio machine. Dude could have gone for another 10 rounds after that, those 5. But man, DDP did not slow down either. Those last 30 seconds of the fight, they were insane. They were throwing everything. Throwing the whole kitchen sink at the end there. And DDP had more gas left in the tank as well. It was incredibly impressive to see, especially with his style. He's not measured, and I say that. It was controlled and it was tactful the way he fought, but he was throwing, you know, and he was walking forward. And Sean's much more, he's closed, he's the Philly shell. He has those kind of solid, but they're not, again, not flashy, what lost him the fight. Straights, jabs. And you could that makes more sense a little bit as to how a fighter could weaponize their cardio, how a fighter could last there. DDP much flashier, much more pop. And on those kicks too, not just the punches. That left kick, man, when he was throwing it to the leg again, Sean was checking it. But that left body kick was there all night. And it was landing. That one must have hurt because, man, did it snap. It made a sound every time it landed. And I think he even landed a few head kicks with that left. Yeah. Great fight. Great fight. And what's next for both of these guys? That's the question. It seems clear with DDP. And I've been saying that the fight we want next, run it back. DDP Sean 2. It's not what's going to happen. There's speculation around UFC 300, I think, still, that Izzy DDP could be the main event, which is a little silly to me. On Ariel's show, he was saying that. He was speculating yesterday that maybe that's the fight they're going to make for UFC 300. And then I think they announced Kayla Harrison Kayla Harrison versus Holly Holm, who got beat by Mayra Buena Silva her last fight, and we just saw an absolute stinker, let's be honest, between Pennington and Buena Silva. That was not a good fight, and Buena Silva lost. And let's not take anything away from Pennington. She's a good fighter. She's been around for a long time. Great to see her win. I'm getting a little bit off topic, but UFC 300, not the surprise we were anticipating. Probably not the surprise we wanted, to be honest. Holly Holm, really? Kayla Harrison, she hasn't even fought. She's been fighting in the PFL. Her first fight in the UFC. That's not what the fans want. Come on. Come on, Dana. Either way, there's speculation about DDP versus Izzy at 300. Too quick of a turnaround for DDP. That was a tough fight. 5 rounds, difficult. We saw his face. I'm sure his body's hurting. He'll need time to recover. We have no idea whether Izzy wants to come back. You know, after the Strickland fight, he stepped away from the sport a bit. He got out of the gym. Is he ready to come back right now? I was watching kind of the Instagram stories through Instagram after the fight, and Izzy was recording the post-fight presser with DDP when DDP was saying that, Izzy's next. It's what the fight fans want to see. And Izzy gave a little thumbs up, so it seems that fight will happen. But April 13th is simply too soon for both guys. It doesn't make sense. I won't be 300. That is an exciting fight, granted, and we had that huge build-up last time, which people are not as excited about that now. There's the Battle of Africa. Let's do it in Africa, by the way. Dana was saying that he was asked if, now that there's a South African champ, if they're finally going to make UFC Africa happen. He was saying, absolutely. But the 2 Africans in Africa, have them fight. It's an exciting one. Not the match they should have made, again. And what's next for Sean Strickland? That's the other question. You know? People have been floating. I've seen a few folks float Chimaev. Really? Chimaev? Number 9, I believe, in the 185 rankings. Who has he beat? I mean, Usman. But Usman at a different weight class. Post-Leon knockout. He's not the same fighter anymore. He's a great fighter. Let's not take anything away from Kamaru, but he's not the champ, and it's not like that was a flashy victory, and it's against a guy that fights at 170. No, absolutely not Chimaev. Rob's up against Paulo Costa, right? Costa has a bad history of making weight, of making fights, so maybe that'll happen. Meaning the Rob Whittaker, Sean Strickland. But it's kind of a weird spot for Strickland now. Where is he supposed to go? Or does he just wait around, see who the winner of this DDP Izzy fight is, and we see him back? But it's weird. It's weird for a guy to fight for a championship coming off of a loss, even if it shouldn't have been a loss. You know, even if people think it shouldn't have been a loss, I don't have a huge problem with it being a split decision. Should have been a draw again, in my opinion, and we run it back immediately. Sean retains the belt, but we do part 2. But that's not what happened, and Sean didn't call for the immediate rematch, which he should have. And now he's just been going off on socials, which I don't know what that's adding. I guess drama. Not in a positive way, you know? The reason he's become a fan favorite is of how, like, real, relatable he is. People don't like this. How long are you going to complain after a fight? Even if you think you won, that's not what people want to hear. You move on, you're a fighter, you accept the result at some point, because it's not going to change. They're not going to go back and shift it. You won't get a second fight. Call for a second fight if you want a second fight, but don't try to do revisionist history. Interesting position. Both guys answered a lot of questions. Sean's a great fighter too. I know I've been hyping up DDP. But he answered a lot of questions too. He had the one great performance against Izzy, and he backed it up this time. He backed it up. Both guys are real champions. Real champions. And he fought a great fight. They gave us a great product. You know, the breakdown and the passions now. People are talking about it so much. It continues to be broken down. It's been 4 or 5 days. Today is, I'm recording on a Wednesday. So yeah, it's Saturday night. It's been a whole 4 days here since the fight, and people are still talking about that. We're not talking about the next card. But ultimately, we accept the result, and we're in an interesting spot as fight fans. Let me know who you want to see next. Whether you're more interested in Izzy versus DDP, which does have a lot of hype. They've already built that up. Or whether they should be running it back. Whether the company's making a mistake. And stay tuned. Subscribe to the podcast. To the YouTube channel. We'll be discussing UFC 300. We'll be discussing this upcoming weekend's fights. We'll be breaking down other fights from 297. And I'll be here for the long run.